Welcome to the Utility Reimbursements Training. This is part one of the Executive Overview. I'm Frederick Cade and I'm the Air Force Utility Reimbursements Program Manager working at AFCEC Energy Rates and Renewables Division.
And I'm Jim Snook. I provide support to Fred Cade, and from 1992 through 2010 I worked at AFCEC on the Utility Rates Management team. From 1995 through 2010 I was the manager for the Utility Reimbursement Program. This is part one of a three-part briefing. Part one is for the BCE and civil engineering leadership. Part two is for civil engineering management and the flight chiefs and supporting personnel from operations, installation management, and engineering. Part three is for the utility engineer. These three presentations are independent of each other. You can watch part one without watching two or three, or you could watch part three without watching parts one and two. Utility sales, sometimes called utility resales, reimbursement, or just resales. This is to tell you what utility sales is, why it's important to you, and what is needed for utility sales to support the civil engineering squadron. In this part one, we'll be explaining the fundamentals of the civil engineering utility sales program. There are two classes of utility customers on an Air Force base. The non-reimbursable customers are provided service by the civil engineer without payment for service. The reimbursable folks provide reimbursement. They actually pay for their service that's provided by the civil engineer. Within the statutes, there are a couple that provide authority for the civil engineer to provide this service to customers on the base. 10 U.S.C. 2686 is the authority for the sale of utility service to non-federal customers on a Air Force installation. The other statute of note is 10 U.S.C. 2491, which limits the use of appropriated funds for the operation and maintenance of a golf course within the continental United States. There are 5 basic categories of customers involved, and a unique utility sales rate is needed for each customer category. Within these customer categories, the DoD rate also applies to medical support facility. Here again, I'll explain some of the words we use. The utility sales rate is also sometimes called the utility rate. It's also sometimes called the resales rate. Some examples of some of the customers we have on the base are the non-federal organization could be a school located on the base. A commercial organization would be a freestanding credit union. Here you can see the annual approximate Air Force budget for utility service. It's usually about $1 billion. Of that $1 billion, $200 million, 20% of that $1 billion, comes from utility reimbursements. The point here is the utility sales program provides a significant amount of revenue for the civil engineering community within the Air Force. Here you can see the total O&M budget, or about $35 billion for the Air Force over a whole year. The green segments at the bottoms of the bar indicate the sales revenue. Those are the dollars that come from utility sales customers. The blue segments in the bar are the utility payments that are made from the appropriated fund account. That's coming from the O&M account. Red section at the top of the bar is the remainder of the annual O&M budget. Starting at the left, you can see that as we currently do it, the utility sales revenue is approximately $200 million a year. If we don't identify all the customers and don't collect those money, you can see that we collect less than $200 million, and the red dot, the red square at the top of that second bar indicates money that's paid from appropriated funds for the utility costs of these reimbursable customers. The third bar, the all reimbursables identified, shows what happens if all the utility customers are identified, collections are every bit as due, and it actually frees up some money into the O&M account. That is the green bar at the top. So the bottom line here is, if we don't collect from these customers, their utility bill is paid with O&M funds that could be used for other things. This describes the general steps in collecting for utility service. And these steps are true for a utility company or an Air Force installation. The customers are already connected to the base utility system and they're going to receive service regardless of the payment process. You can see that since the service is provided, the things that are important here are the rate calculation, the meter reading, and invoicing for an Air Force base. While these are all important steps, the focus of the three-part series is on creating the utility sales rate. So some variation of this method you see is used by every utility company in the United States. For a period of 1 year, they determine the total amount of revenue they will require in order to run the company. For the same period of year, they will determine, or they will either estimate or look at records to see how much service will be provided. In the example of electricity, it'd be kilowatt hours. In the example of natural gas, it'd be in million BTUs. Water could be in thousands of gallons or thousands of cubic feet. They then calculate a utility rate by dividing the dollars required by the quantity to be provided. Now, this is a very oversimplified statement of how it actually works. If you would look at a rate filing for a large utility company, there's enough paper generated to fill a boxcar. It's a lot more complex than this, but every utility company uses some variation of this method. This method is what's used at the Air Force to determine what the utility sales rates are. This particular slide is true for both utility companies and Air Force installations. Sales rates can be calculated with very accurate data, or they can be estimated. And if they're estimated, they're questionable. That is, they're open to dispute by the customers. Same thing is true of the invoice, the monthly invoice. If the monthly usage is determined by a meter, there's no question about it. If the monthly usage is determined by an estimate, there's a question. Anytime there's a question, a customer can dispute the bill and argue about whether they owe it or not. So this slide describes some of the process for an Air Force installation specifically. In order to create an accurate sales rate, all the costs that contribute to the total annual cost of providing utility service must be known, and the more accurate, the better off it is.
This concludes part one of our presentation for the executive overview. If you have any questions, please contact me at the information that's shown on the screen. Additionally, we have two more presentations. Utility Sales Part 2, which is the management requirement for operations, engineering, and installation management flights, and Part 3, which is for the utility engineer on calculating utility sales rates.